Welcome back to the Mind Mountain podcast. This is the podcast that delves deep into the mental performance side of mountain biking so that you guys, the listener, can pick up tools, tips, and tactics to help you have more fun on the trails more often. Today on the podcast, we've got John Casson. John is the Director of Education at the Professional Mountain Bike Instructor Association, otherwise known as the PMBIA. John brings a deep background in coach development and high-performance sport, with years spent coaching at the World Cup at Olympic level in snowboarding and leading both mountain biking and snowboarding coach education systems across North America. With a strong focus on developing the whole athlete, today we're going to dive into how a more human-centered approach to coaching can help riders build confidence and continue to progress on the bike. John, with no further ado, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Jake. It's really great to be here, and thanks for inviting me. And your description of me makes it sound way more glamorous than it actually was. But yeah, it's been really fun ride, and just happy to be here and share some of my experience with you.
Amazing. As usual, I'd like to start things today by dialing back the clock a little bit. And this is a story I don't think I even know myself yet. But how did you first get into mountain biking?
Oh my gosh. Let's take us back to the summer of 1987-ish, roughly. Now, I had a good friend growing up that his name is Nils, so I'll give him a little bit of shout out here. And we just kind of like adventured together even as teenagers. And then we got into hiking and skateboarding and all these different playing outdoor stuff. And then one day he shows up, he had a part-time job, got a part-time job working in a bike shop, building bikes. And one day he shows up, we actually worked at Toys R Us. He shows up at our work at Toys R Us and says, "Hey, I got a giant iguana." And I'm like, "Okay, you got a big lizard. Great. Awesome." And he's like, no, it's a mountain bike. It's called a mountain bike. I'm like, "What's that?" He's like, "Well, it's like those BMX bikes you used to ride around, but it's got gears and stuff. And you go and ride on these hiking trails we go and hike on." He's like, "Okay, that sounds really cool." So I borrowed a friend's bike a few weeks later, and we went out for our first ride, full on like jorts, hiking boots, t-shirt, probably cut off at the sleeves or something like that. Maybe I wore a helmet. I don't know. But we just grew from there. And about a year later, I got my first bike. It was a Trek 850 Antelope that Nils used a little Sharpie and put a C in front of. And then so for the first couple of years of my mountain bike career, I rode a Trek Cantaloupe, which was pretty hilarious. And we just got super into it. I got a job at the bike shop that he worked at. We built bikes. I was 16, 17 years old. We just built bikes at night for, I don't know, $8 a bike or whatever, and got into like the parts and the magazines and just got super into it. So, fast forward to college, and I went to college in West Virginia, which is even back then in 1990, was a pretty well-known spot for mountain biking on the East Coast. They had a really robust race series, and I just kind of got more and more into mountain biking living up in the hills of West Virginia. It just became a huge part of my life. To this day, almost 40 years later, Nils is still one of my best riding buddies. We get together. He lives back east. I live out west. We get together at least 2 or 3 times a year and ride bikes together. He's a ripping good rider. He should be an instructor. I keep bugging him to take one of our courses. But that's how it started. And it just kept going from there. After I moved out west, it just kept building and building and building. So it's been a huge part of my life. For almost 40 years, I met my wife through mountain biking. We adventure together on mountain bikes. And it's just a part of my identity and who I am. It's something I'm really passionate about.
Amazing. That really shines through when you're speaking to that story.
I love the Cantaloupe. It's like, and so if you want to follow me on Trail Forks, my handle is Cantaloupe 1988, because that's when I got that Trek Antelope.
Okay, fantastic. And it's striking, isn't it? Like that story of getting into mountain biking, it's quite different to what it looks like for someone who may be getting into mountain biking today and buying a modern mountain bike, or maybe even an e-mountain bike, and having all of these developed trails and instructors and clubs. It's very different, isn't it?
Oh, it's so different. And it's so many different aspects you just touched on are so different. Not to mention the gear, of course, is like so different. We could spend an hour and a half talking about just the gear. But I think like the expense, for better or for worse, so much research and development has gone into making bikes what they are today. That Trek Antelope was maybe $350, might have been $400. And, for better or for worse, like the bikes are so much better, but they're also really expensive now. So the entry point to get into mountain biking is certainly an obstacle for many people, which it wasn't for me back then. But also like from a cultural standpoint, there's the culture around mountain biking and to society and subculture mountain biking and community is so different. in really, really cool ways. And so diverse. And there's so many different ways that you can enjoy mountain biking. And I also look back, I did spend some time working for NICA here in the US, which is the high school mountain bike leagues. And we didn't have those when I was in high school starting out riding. It would have probably kept me out of a lot of trouble had I actually had a team and a coach that was looking out for me. We just kind of figured it out on our own. But that's a huge, huge thing. I look at for my time with NICA, there's 7,000 kids in just the Utah League alone. So there's 7,000 kids in Utah who are doing high school mountain biking versus like the 3 in my high school in 1988. You know what I mean? So just the fact that it's so embracing of youth and like that, where I was 40 years ago is now such an accepted thing to do as a high school student. It's just super cool to see it come so far in such a relatively short period of time.
It's really cool, isn't it? And that it kind of reminds me, my partner Kat grew up here on the North Shore, just in Vancouver there. And like 3 doors down from the Yellow Gate on a mountain called Mount Frome, which I'm sure you're familiar. One of the best places to ride a mountain bike in the world.
Yeah.
But she talked about growing up, and she said it just like wasn't on her radar as a female to try mountain biking, even though she lived right next to it. And then we compare that now to today, which is like 15 years since then. And it's like, we've got actual groups for females getting into mountain biking. We've got women's enduro races, and just all these things that have developed. And it's there's so many more pathways to get into mountain biking now, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So there's so many different entry points on however you want to enjoy the sport. There's so many different ways to get into it.
And for you, when did the interest in the skill development side of mountain biking come into that, or how did that become a thing for you?
So that's interesting because even though mountain biking has been kind of the through thread of everything of my life since I was a teenager and is what inspired me to move out west, snowboarding, as you mentioned in that really nice intro, became kind of my career. When I moved to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, shortly after college, it was the snowboarding that brought me there because Steamboat had always been on my radar. But mountain biking, once I discovered how great the mountain biking was in the summertime, that was what kind of hooked me to stay for as long as I did. And one of the things when I moved to Steamboat is I needed a job, and I always liked working with people. So I became a snowboard instructor, and that's where the interest in teaching, instructing, and skill development came in. It wasn't until way later that I realized there was such a thing as mountain bike instructors. And I think my wife got into it. We might've been dating or married at the time. I don't remember exactly in the timeline when she took her first mountain bike instructor's course. And I was like, oh, I had no idea that they had mountain bike instructors or there was mountain bike lessons. Like many people, it just doesn't seem like it's something, to quote the cliche, it's like riding a bike. Never was thought that there'd be instruction to it.
Well, totally. Growing up in Australia, I had no idea that this was a profession and a career, and it perhaps wasn't when I was growing up. But it's really cool to see how that's developed and tagged up the ski industry here in North America.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's been a big part of it. Is the paradigm in the ski world of taking a lesson has definitely been a model that mountain biking has followed. There's definitely some differences for sure, but a lot of the mountain bike instructor systems have been built by ski and snowboard instructors or been influenced by ski and snowboard instructors. So it was just a natural fit for me. And I took my first certification course and got super into that, the concept of teaching mountain biking and then teaching as a whole.
Amazing. And then fast forward to today, I'd love to hear the story of you joining the PMBAA, and then tell us a little bit about what your current role as the Director of Education entails.
All right, so that's a bit of a 2-part question. So through snowboarding, I met some of the original founders. Well, maybe not original founders, but some of the people who work pretty closely with PMBAA. And we started talking about. I've been more aligned with what's now called BICP here in the U.S. when I first kind of started out, and then with the National High School League, NICA. But I didn't really know much about PMBAA. I'd heard about it, and I knew it was a bit of a different system and a different look on skill development. And so I was chatting with this one particular individual on the side of courses and snowboarding. We were talking about mountain biking. So I finally took my first course, and a lot of things clicked for me. The way that the PMBAA system is set up really appeals to the way that I built snowboard coach education, have been involved and had some influence on some other coaching systems. The way that structure is set up really clicked for me and made a lot of sense for me. So I got more involved and tried and became an instructor trainer, leading courses. And then I retired from snowboard coaching after the 2024 or 2024-25 season. And my original intent was to take some time off and figure out what the next step in life was. For better or for worse, the PMBA position opened up right about the same time that I retired. I think it was March of 2025. And I was like, darn it, no break for me. This is like the perfect fit for me and for my skill set, and for what I wanted to do in the next direction I wanted to take in my professional career. So I applied and fortunate enough to get the job. And it's been super rewarding. I've been in it for just about a year now. I think I officially started in June of 2025. And the role is really overseeing the curriculum development, and the training of our instructor trainers are probably the two main pillars of what I'm doing.
Amazing. And it's been really cool seeing all of the new developments that have come out in that year since you've been working there. And we'll talk more about some of those kind of at the end of this conversation.
Sure.
But I wanted to, you mentioned, I wanted to touch on what really stood out in the PMBIA's curriculum for you, because I know for me it was a game changer when I took my first course as well. And I think probably like the thing that stood out the most for me was just the simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously, watched the YouTube tutorials and read the mountain bike magazines and the how-tos, and I had all this information in my head, as well as just random tips from buddies that some were good, some were not so good. Lots of information. But taking that first PMBIA course was like, just that's really simple. This is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. This is how. And just like the I guess like the lack of over-explaining really resonated with me and helped me understand the concepts and do them on a level I hadn't been able to do before. So I'm curious, was it similar for you, or was it something else that stood out?
That's more or less it. But let me start with a little bit of a side story. I'll come at this from a little bit of a different angle. One of the things I was fortunate enough to be involved in was the development of the snowboard coach education, not instructor education. That's been well established, but there was no education for competitive snowboard coaches. And so myself and a few other coaches kind of got together and created an outline and kind of built it. This was like in 2006. And one of the things I really wanted to do was embrace the culture of snowboarding and make sure that we weren't prescribing exactly how to do something. We were talking about concepts, we were talking about principles, we were talking about overarching ideas, and not into the minutia of exactly how something is done. And I remember when we rolled it out, I got a call from, I'll give him a shout out, Bill Enos. Bill Enos was the first head slopestyle coach for the U.S. snowboard team, led the U.S. snowboard team to a sweep of the podium in the 2014 Olympics. Anyway, Bill is a legend. Bill's also a little, he can be a little cynical, grumpy, maybe. He'll appreciate me saying this. But he called me, he's like, dude, you can't tell me how to teach somebody how to do a 360. And I was like, that's not what we're doing. We're teaching the concepts of what builds a 360. And then you as the coach can actually figure out how to use those concepts to teach somebody how to do a 360 in the way that you want to do it. He's like, oh wait, that sounds good. I'm obviously paraphrasing that conversation, but so anyway, that's always been my philosophy in coaching athletes, but also in coach development, is let's teach the concepts, let's teach the principles, let's teach the framework, and then let everybody else interpret it and build lessons, sessions, the outcomes the way they see fit using those concepts. And that's very much the PMBA 6 skills approach. Is this, here's the why and the how all these things work, here's how they interact. And now you as an instructor can use all these different puzzle pieces to put together a session or a lesson or a season to help your students reach their outcome based on those principles. So coming back to full circle to your question, that's what appealed to me most about the PMBA system, was that structure and framework, but the freedom and adaptability to use those pieces to meet the student outcomes.
Yeah, it really resonates with me, and kind of stands out as like the idea that no two learners are the same. Everyone learns a little bit differently. So I guess our job as the coach is to figure out who we're working with as a human and to deliver the lessons in the way that lands for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then as well as that, it's like no two riders are the same either. There's
right.
no one way or like one correct technique, whether we're talking about jumps, drops, roll downs. There's definitely like what works well for most people most of the time, but everyone's going to put their own flavor on it and bring in their own kind of unique strengths and weaknesses. So
for sure. We can generalize a little bit and say that like newer mountain bikers or newer people to any sport, for example, are going to take more direct instruction, where you're going to give them like a very prescribed step-by-step, very direct coaching. Do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, versus more experienced riders can be a little more nuanced and a little more guided. And that's a super big generalization, but Yeah, exactly. Our framework allows us to take either of those approaches, whatever you choose, is going to meet those student needs.
Mm. Yeah, it's a really important point as well, isn't it? Like not only meeting the student where they're at, but also calling them forward to where the next level is.
Yeah.
But we're able to do that if we're teaching all levels of mountain bikers in the same way. For example, if we, get a brand new rider and then we take this really kind of high-end coaching approach to their riding, it's not going to make sense to them. It's all going to be abstract, and they're like, I still don't know how to actually execute that maneuver.
Yep.
Whereas if we get someone that's been riding for years and maybe they are competing, they're racing, whatever, and we take a really direct approach and tell them everything they're doing is wrong, it's like, that's not going to work either.
Yeah, 100%. You hit that nail on the head right there for sure.
And I guess for me, this is kind of touching on that human-centric approach that the PMBAA talks so much about. For our listeners, can you tell us, like, what is a human-centered approach to coaching?
Oh, well, I think to sum it up, and we could talk about all the different bullet points, but to sum it up, you said it perfectly. It's meeting the students where they are, trying to figure out what their needs are, what motivates them, what's going to resonate with them, what are the outcomes they're shooting for, and tailoring and adapting your approach to meet them where they are, and creating a human connection, creating that trust and respect. That's gonna open up those learning paths that create a positive learning environment that's going to allow that person to flourish and learn, whether that's in an hour-long lesson or a season-long training program.
Fantastic. That kind of leads me into another thing I wanted to ask you. I seen it. I'm not sure if you posted this. It might have been someone else at the PMBIA. But there was a great post on Instagram recently kind of talking about the difference between information and implementation. I'm not sure if you know the post I'm talking about. It was
Are you referring to the one about like how people like watch YouTube videos
yeah,
yeah.
like put it in my notes here. It started off like in an era of YouTube University.
Yep.
Riders are showing up to the trailhead, having watched all the tutorials, all the drills they found online. Access to information has never been higher, but also that makes our job as mountain bike instructors even more vital. I'd love you to speak into that a little bit.
It's funny you highlighted that one because that's actually a Coach's Corner blog post, I guess, piece that I wrote for our newsletter. But out of all the social media that's come out, our new social media person is doing a fantastic job with PMBA. But out of all the stuff that's been posted, that's like the one thing that I actually wrote.
Amazing.
So, but yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. There's so much great information out there on the internet today that explains what to do. But until you get that eyeball to eyeball connection with somebody, you can look at what you're doing, create that human connection, create that trust and respect, and helping to fuel their confidence. All that stuff is great background information, but until you get that human connection and somebody who can really look at what you're doing, help you progress to the next step, that's where the magic happens as being an instructor, is that face-to-face. And all this stuff with like AI coming out, that's coming for our jobs, not our jobs, because that human connection is still really very real, particularly in a sport that has a lot of fear and that has the literal danger of physical harm that could happen if you do it, quote unquote, wrong. And so that human connection of creating confidence through trust and respect is such a critical component of what we do. And all that I have no problem with YouTube videos that are out there, except for the ones that are kind of like wrong. But I have no problem with people like looking at those things. But but I think it's a mistake to think that you're going to get all the information that you need to get better mountain biking just from a YouTube video. That human connection with an instructor or somebody who can put it into language that's going to help you progress is just a critical component of the whole equation.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because so often students come to us and they're seeking information. They're wanting to know how to do a drop or how to ride steeps more effectively, whatever it is. What they're really seeking is that implementation or the embodiment you speak of. They're wanting to know how to do it, and not only understand how to do it up here, they're wanting to be able to feel the movement and know when to do it, how much to do it in a whole variety of different environments. So that's where our job really comes in, like you say, closing that feedback loop and saying, hey, so you understand this is what we're actually seeing. So in order to do that more successfully, this is the one thing we actually need to tweak.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the magic lies, isn't it? Like you say, we can watch tutorials all day. We can have an AI coach for even more information on top of that and confuse us even more. But until someone distills all of that information down into like, this is the one thing to focus on at this exact point in your ride, kind of useless, isn't it? It's just adding confusion to the
Totally. Yeah, I mean, in this day and age of being able to access the entire knowledge of human civilization at our fingertips, how does somebody filter that down? And there's principles of in the work of oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the scientist's name. Anders Ericsson, who coined the whole concept of deliberate practice. One of the concepts of deliberate practice is having an expert providing feedback and providing guidance to reaching towards your goals. And that's such a critical component that has to be there. And like you mentioned, like our job is to filter like when, how much, what. But a big component of what we do is also where. And terrain choice and being able to pick appropriate terrain for somebody is also really appropriate. They can watch a video on YouTube on roll downs or drops, but being able to identify like a really good roll down or drop that's a good one to practice on and how to progress through those stages is also a skill that we bring as instructors too, is that knowledge of what are the size, speed, and shape of those features that's going to really help somebody progress too. So it's an important aspect.
You mentioned something else there around, YouTube tutorials, and there being nothing wrong with them, except for the ones that are quote unquote wrong. It made me laugh because, yeah, I share that as well, but it is interesting. I find there's not many tutorials left out there these days, or like new ones being published that I'll watch and be like, that's flat out wrong.
Yeah.
Thanks to, the work of organizations like the PMBIA, I think we have weeded out a lot of the whole, like, just get back and stay off the front break and stuff like that is pretty flat out unhelpful. But often what I'll see is things explained in different ways, and I'll be able to then translate that into the language I use to coach. And I may sometimes think I could explain this in a more effective way. But I think the main problem I have with the tutorials these days, especially the ones that are coming from writers that don't necessarily have a professional coaching background, they might be, say, pro racers or just YouTubers, really high-level writers, is they'll oftentimes explain it as like, if you're having this problem with your jump in, this is the one way, this is the one thing to remember to fix this. And it's almost like this is the one right way.
Yep.
That was what you spoke about as at the start here, is instead of teaching like this is the one way to do a jump or a drop, we teach these are the principles. These are the things that are going to form a strong foundation and set us up for success in drops. And then we go through all of the different variations in the when and how much we use those principles. Do you share?
Totally. Well, in a way, what you're describing is that like a YouTube video is static, right? There's no feedback loop in there. So it often has to come across as like, this is the one way to do things. And, one that comes to mind is cornering. I had a really intriguing internet or email conversation with a gentleman. I get these emails fairly regularly about, wanting to discuss some sort of technique or tactic or skill. We were talking about cornering, and so many internet videos show that really sexy looking corner where the bike is leaned over and the handlebar's almost on the ground, as we standing on top of it, the hips are all rotated, and it looks really cool. But in actuality, we rarely get to that full level of extreme movement on the extreme ends of the spectrum. But yet that's presented as this is the one tip that's going to make your cornering magical. But it's very static. There's no dynamicity. Is that a word? Did I just make up a word? Dynamicity to it. In that, well, in this situation, you can do this. In this situation, you might turn this dial down and turn this dial up. And so that's where I think, to your point, the YouTube tutorials are a great foundational place. But if it becomes too regimented and too much like this is the one way to do things, I think people can get stuck in that one narrow lane and forget that mountain biking is really dynamic and that every turn is a little bit different. Every body movement needs to adapt to that turn in order to achieve that outcome. And those concepts that we have in this PMBAA skill system are the things that actually matter. Stability, balance, grip, traction, control. At the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. And all those different techniques lead to those things. So yeah, a little bit of a long-winded answer, but totally agree. Static versus dynamic.
I love it. And I love the long-winded answers. That's what we're here for. It's a long-form conversation.
Your listeners enjoy it too.
Fingers crossed. At the very least, we'll enjoy this conversation.
Sure.
I'm curious, like the differences you see in that kind of taking students from information, so understanding a new skill, a new concept, to implementation. What are the differences you see in the students that say take a shorter term coaching program, whether that's like a 3-day instructor's course versus a longer term? It might be like you're working with an athlete over a full year. What are the differences you see there?
Well, I think I alluded to this earlier. Typically, newer riders or newer instructors need just a little more direct approach to it, a little more scripted, versus when you have more experience, whether that's an athlete or as an instructor, you can kind of freelance a little bit. Let's like use a bit of a cooking analogy, right? If you want to make a chocolate chip cookie and you've never made one before in your life, you follow that recipe. This much flour, this many eggs, this many chocolate chips, this much butter, whatever. And you kind of make that recipe. You do that 3, 4, 10, 12 times and see how it comes out. And as you get more experience with that chocolate chip cookie recipe, you might think, well, I want it a little more chewy. I'm going to use brown sugar instead of regular sugar. But you understand how those things now interact, and you understand how the sugar interacts with everything else in order to create that more chewiness. So as you gain more experience, you can then be more adaptable and flexible because you know what each of those concepts does and what role each ingredient plays in the baking process. And then at an even deeper level, you understand the chemical reaction of sugar, flour, eggs, etc. That you understand how that chemical reaction works. And then you can really start tweaking things. And that's another level of understanding. So you start from kind of like almost repetition, so to speak. And by the end, you get into analysis and creation. And that takes some time and some experience to get from that bottom level of learning to that top level of learning and application.
Yeah, that really mirrors what I see as well. And it's interesting. I find oftentimes in those earlier lessons with newer riders, they will obviously like have these breakthrough moments when their riding will completely change because all of a sudden they're learning how to stay centered on their bike and create bike body movement, bike body separation, things like this. And it's a game changer for them. But oftentimes I do find riders will get to perhaps that more intermediate or advanced stage in their riding. And if they haven't received any more coaching since those first couple of lessons, oftentimes they are stuck, perhaps like fully rotating their hips on every corner in the same exact same recipe for every corner. And there's not that nuance there or that kind of, I want to say advanced level of understanding. And I think
what I see with instructors is sorry, I was talking over you. What I see with instructors is oftentimes this gets a little, I don't want to say frustrating, but like people take like their level 1 in whatever, snowboard instructing, ski instructing, mountain bike instructing, doesn't really matter. And they get all these great concepts like, oh, cool, I've never thought about teaching it that way before. This is amazing. I've learned so much. And they go out and they become an instructor of those things. They start teaching and they just teach at that level 1 level. And oftentimes that level 1 level is just a foundation. There's so much more nuance and adaptability and flexibility in teaching and instructing. They're kind of like, oh, no, I don't need to learn anything more. Because they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what we add on at level 2 or what's presented at level 2. And again, whatever sport that is. And they kind of get stuck in teaching like, no, this is the right way to do things. This is what I learned at level 1. Well, as you gain more experience and more knowledge and more education, you understand those nuances and you understand that adaptability and flexibility. You begin to question that straight and narrow path becomes multiple pathways to get to an outcome. So yeah, it's definitely something that I've seen quite a bit with both athletes and instructors.
It's interesting, isn't it? I was definitely guilty of this early on in my career. Like I said, taking that first PMBIA level 1 course was kind of like this breakthrough moment for me. And I kind of held it up there as like this Bible, which is like, this is how you teach mountain biking. And it was only in, continuing my progression as a coach and as a rider that I realized that actually there's no one way to teach mountain biking, and it is very situational depending on where the person is at, where are they coming into this lesson and where we go. And it kind of, like, not to hate on pro riders who are also coaches. I think there's some fantastic pro rider coaches out there. Then there's some others we see who do perhaps take their level 1 and think, okay, yeah, like I know mountain biking, like I'm certified now and I'm good to go. But it does sometimes leave a gap. They've got this, really, really advanced skill set. It's probably well beyond both of our skill sets. But then the teaching skill set can perhaps be lacking on the other side because it's only going to like that beginner intermediate level, and then the riders they wanted to teach maybe closer to their level as a professional athlete. So I think really important to have all of the chapters in the book and to never stop learning.
Yeah, and to your point about pro riders is a great example. Like all the experience in the world and all the ability in the world to ride a bike or a snowboard or whatever, but the ability to distill down that information and provide it to people at different levels is a totally different skill. And I've seen lots of professional athletes go into coaching when their professional athletic careers are done, and what I've seen is that there's very little correlation between athletic experience and success as a coach. No correlation one way or another. It just depends on that person's personality and their ability to create a connection with somebody, ability to take information and parse it into the language, terminology, and pacing that's needed for the level of athlete or student that they're working with. So yeah, it's definitely a skill to be an instructor.
It is, and I think it's one we never stop honing, isn't it? And that's what makes it fun, like mountain biking.
For sure.
Like how good you can get at coaching. Just like there's no ceiling on how good you can get it right in and how much fun you can have.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. Like I've always said for years that the day I think I've learned, I know everything there is about coaching and instructing is the day I should quit. And that's not why I retired.
Well, it's interesting.
Not because I already knew everything. I'm like, I'm done. I know it all.
You're a great example. You retired from snowboarding coaching full time, and then all of a sudden this opportunity came up, and probably the fact that you couldn't say no to it was like, oh, this is a different avenue to go down in my professional coaching career, a way I can keep honing that skill set.
100%. And that was a big part of the appeal. Like I said, I've been involved in mountain bike instructing and leading some courses for a while, but not really at this level. And so the opportunity to take what I've learned over and the mistakes often that I've made in snowboard coaching world and apply that to mountain bike coaching world was just too much of an opportunity to pass up, to continue to learn and grow as a professional and to continue to get better and get better at what I've made my life into.
Yeah, amazing. I think it represents a great opportunity for all of us instructors that are then learning from the organization to have some fresh knowledge come into it. So that's awesome. You touched on earlier the fact that mountain biking is obviously inherently perhaps a high consequence or a high risk sport, especially as we progress through into that kind of strong intermediate or advanced level in our riding. Oftentimes we are riding steeper terrain that is faster with bigger features. So I'm curious, for you in high consequence environments, what are some ways you've found to coach riders to make better decisions under pressure?
Oh wow, that's a jar of worms.
Feel free to take
Yeah.
it.
So what's interesting is the sport I coach in snowboarding with snowboard cross, which I think everybody has this image of being like this rough and tumble sport. Everybody's like gladiators, like pushing each other over and fighting on the course. And it's not really that way. It's very much about making good decisions and adapting and making those decisions quickly. Yes, there are lots of crashes. There is a bit of an element from a spectator that probably like appeals to kind of like the NASCAR type of thing, but that's not what the sport is about. But there is a big element of risk. And at some point you have to commit to that risk and embrace that risk and know that it's out there and do everything you can to mitigate it. And same thing in mountain biking. And so some of the ways you do that are, like I mentioned before, is being really intentional about terrain that you select. And this is particularly true in mountain biking. If you get somebody who wants to learn how to do, we've got a really tricky drop here in Grand Junction called Cathedral Drop. If somebody comes to me and says they want to learn Cathedral Drop, the first thing I'm going to do is not go right to Cathedral Drop. We're going to work on I'm going to get an assessment of their abilities, see where they're at, see where the gaps are, my knowledge of the skills it takes to successfully execute Cathedral Drop. I'm going to assess where they are and find out where the gaps are in those skills and address those skills on much easier terrain and much easier, lower consequence areas before we advance to that last feature. And that advancing to that Cathedral Drop, we can keep using that as a hypothetical example, might take a day, but it might take 2 months. It depends on where those gaps are. So you want to make sure that the people have mastery, maybe not full mastery, autonomous mastery of every skill element that's in there, but where they're comfortable, confident, and consistent in how they apply those fundamental skills and working your way up to those more advanced features. And I think you can hold people's interest by relating what we're doing to their end goal. Like, this is all leading up to it, making sure they have a clear picture of how this particular thing we're working on today is going to lead them towards that goal of cathedral drop or clearing a line or whatever. So yeah, it's that progression, but not keeping it so low that they lose interest, keeping it challenging and engaging without getting too far on the risk side of things. So it's a tricky balance, and it takes knowledge of your terrain area, it takes knowledge of all the different skills, and it takes patience, and it takes ability to connect with your student to make sure that they understand that what you're doing is working them towards their bigger goals.
Definitely. And am I right in saying that that timeline can be different for each different rider?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Like, you might get somebody show up at the Whistler Bike Park whose goal is to ride clean every jump on A-line, but they're coming from here in Colorado and they ride Snowmass all the time, and they can clear everything on Valhalla, which is a little mini A-line, not quite as big. And you'll take them and take them for a run on what's the next step down, man? Crank It Up, right? I think.
Yeah, maybe Seymour.
Or Seymour, yeah. And you're trying to get you're going to take them out, maybe probably not right on there, but maybe take them for a little bit of a lap first somewhere, check their ability. Okay, this guy knows how to jump, or girl knows how to jump, so we're going to go and check out Crank It Up and Seymour. And then, okay, cool, all right, check, and you might get into A-line in a day, and then you can work on refining their skills on A-line versus somebody who's never jumped before, but they're coming from Moab and has a really strong technical ability and good mastery of controlling their bike. It still might take a little bit longer to adapt those skills to a different outcome. So yeah, to your point, it's everybody's different, which goes back to your human-centric approach too, right? So assessing what their goals are, where they're at, and figuring out how we fill in those gaps as instructors.
Definitely. And I'm curious, just to ask an obvious question, but how might the outcome be different if we were to take the student straight to, was it cathedral drop?
Well, I mean, like,
so they come in, they're like, hey, I want to do this hard thing. You're like, oh, I think we're quite there yet. What would happen if she had to take them right there? What could happen?
Well, what could happen? I mean, like, at the worst end of this, actually, the likely outcome is a crash. Is an unsuccessful outcome, which in these high consequence environments, particularly like drops and jumps, where there's a critical instant where you are, let's see, what's the right word, in the trajectory of what you've done previously, but haven't quite finished the move. That critical instant right there is where accidents happen and crashes happen. So yeah, if you were to take somebody without any sort of background and just go right to cathedral or A-line and just send it, like, the danger is physical injury.
And it's even interesting just from, like, someone might not be in a coaching environment, but they might have this goal, go out to it. Sometimes we can go out to it too early and just, like, get really scared or have, like, a really uncomfortable moment on the trail that can then drag out that process of then going back and rebuilding from that place, rather than just, like you say, taking a skills lesson from the start, building things up in that right kind of incremental progression manner, can actually shorten the timeline in getting there and making sure we are confident when we're there, setting ourselves up for success versus setting ourselves up to be terrified of the thing.
Totally. And I'd say a likely scenario is injuring somebody, but even in a best case scenario, if they're able to perform that maneuver, perform that outcome, it's probably going to be pretty scary. And you can use those tools, those skills, to build progression to it. So when they do take that leap of faith, they're much more confident, which is then going to help to lay a foundation for the next one. One of the analogies I use, you'll get to know, I like a lot of analogies and comparisons. There's the movie Indiana Jones, and I think it's The Last Crusade, the one where he's going and finding the Holy Grail. At the very end, he's got to cross that bridge, and spoiler alert, the bridge is actually painted to camouflage to look like the ground underneath. So the bridge is actually there, but you can't see it. It looks invisible, and it's called the leap of faith. And this great scene where Harrison Ford playing Indiana Jones, like, literally, he looks at his little book, his instructions, says, I can't cross that. I'm going to die. And how many times do we have students who say that, like, I can't do that drop, I'm going to die? Well, you're not actually literally going to die. But he has to take all of his faith, and the scene is awesome. He just kind of sticks his foot out and slowly, and then it drops on solid ground. And our job as instructors is to get people confident so they can, and right to the point where all they got to do is make that small leap. But at some point, they've got to make that that jump themselves. They've got to drop cathedral. They've got to try and go into a jump and A-line with the speed that it needs to happen. But our job as instructors is to do everything we possibly can so when they get to that critical instance, they are prepared and believe in themselves and are confident and have all the skills that we know they're capable of doing it. That they know they're capable of doing it. So yeah, trying to get them ready for that leap of faith.
I love that. And I mentioned there, like not going to a, say, hard feature too early,
Right.
in case, we do have a unsuccessful experience on there that then extends the timeline. That's like, while that's true, I will also oftentimes take people to features that are like, say, 2 or 3 steps ahead of where they currently are, but that's their end goal. And we will look at them, but we'll do that in a very intentional way. And we'll kind of frame that in a way of like, hey, we're going to go out and have a look at this feature. We're going to talk about how we might approach it. We're going to practice calming our nervous system along with that. We're going to do all these things so that later on in the season, when we're back there, it's going to be less scary. I'm curious if you do that with riders, and if so, how do you frame it when you take a rider out to like their end goal feature or the end goal trail before they're actually ready to be riding it yet?
I absolutely do that. And I wouldn't say absolutely, but I think it varies depending on, the physical feature. So for example, just the hypothetical feature I used before, cathedral drop, is pretty hard to get to in the first place. So if that's somebody's goal, I'm probably not going to go over there right off the bat and go and examine it, because there's a bunch of skills you need to do to get there in the first place. But that's just one specific instance. But that's consideration in that type. But yeah, for sure. Like we'll go look at that feature. We do this a lot, probably more in snowboarding, because mountain biking, where either we don't have access to lifts, so it makes it getting to places, getting to things, getting to particular features maybe a little more difficult. If you have access to lifts and are working in a bike park, you can get to those spots and then pretty easily like go around them. And so physically, like the physical location of things has an impact on that. But from a theoretical perspective, yes, let's look at the end goal. Let's break it down. Let's even talk to them about what the skills are that are going to need to tackle it. And then go try that on some other things. And I think what that does is creates that engagement, creates that vision of what the end goal is, and gets them more engaged in the process, the different steps you're going to employ to get there. So, but the physical location of where that feature is a big factor in it, right?
Totally, yeah. And we might, like in that instance, take them to, like you said before, similar features.
Yeah.
To kind of
like you could maybe might get a little busy, but theoretically you could just kind of roll through A-line and just roll over all the tops of the jumps, as long as you're not getting landed on by the train of people coming behind you.
But
so you could just roll through it. Yeah.
Do that with students sometimes, just to get an idea of like, this is where we're heading. This is the terrain we're dealing with. It's almost like showing someone a map of a trek you're about to do the next day. Yeah,
that could be, I think the downside that we have to consider, and again, this goes back to that human-centric approach and trying to make sure we understand what's motivating people, what are their fears, what are they confident about. Doing that could have the potential of being deflating too. Like, oh my gosh, this is way bigger than I thought it was. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to do this. So you got to be a little bit careful about those things too, and making sure that that person is not going to be defeated before you even start by seeing like, that's what A-line looks like. Holy crap, that's way bigger than I thought.
Yeah, again, that comes back to that human-centered approach again, doesn't it?
Yep, for sure. Like getting an assessment of where they are physically, but also an assessment of where they are from an experience point of view, and assessment of where they are mentally and how they approach learning. So yeah, that's all part of taking in information when you start working with somebody.
Yeah, totally. And I love the analogy before, the Indiana Jones reference of kind of stepping of faith and knowing when to take the leap of faith. I'm curious for yourself on a personal riding level, how do you differentiate between a legitimate fear that's actually keeping you safe and keeping you from doing something that you're not quite ready for yet, and then perhaps a limiting fear that could otherwise be labeled a sense of nervousness or even perhaps excitement that could be on the verge?
For me personally, in my personal riding, I'm very visual. I take in a lot of information visually, and we can dive into learning styles and stuff like that. But that for me, I'll look at some stuff. I'll kind of like make some calculations in my head. I have enough experience with different features and my own level of riding and my own risk threshold. I'm not old, but I've been around for a while. I've got some years on the planet. My risk threshold has probably gone down a little bit over the years. And so those are the different factors I weigh things against, and decide if it's something that I want to try or not. I couldn't tell you what to be honest, I don't, I do take in all that information, but at some degree, it's a bit of a gut feeling. I remember being, we were in St. George last year, and there's a feature that I just looked at it and I know it's doable, but I was like, nope, not going to do that one. And there's other ones that have been like, okay, that seems all right. And I don't know if there's any real pattern to it. I've never really stopped to analyze that, but I do know visually I'll look at something, kind of picture what the movement will look like, analyze that against my risk threshold, and then make a decision.
I love that. I totally mirror that in my own writing as well and in my own decision making. Both like the risk tolerance going down, both with getting older and also like doing this for a job. I hurt myself last summer, being a little bit too ambitious and perhaps shortening the timeline of an ambitious project, and that kind of highlighted to me the need to turn the risk tolerance down a little bit. But at the same time, I obviously wanted to keep growing as a writer and as a professional, because that's what I find fun. So I'm curious for you, like, what are some ways that you continue to learn and grow as a mountain biker without necessarily just taking bigger and bigger risks or doing higher and higher consequence features?
Well, my wife and I were actually talking about this last night. Is one of the things that really drives us as mountain bikers, and one of the things that's cool, that's so cool about our sport, is going to different places. We love traveling and going to different spots to mountain bike. And then, so once you get to a different spot, the terrain is different, the soil is different, the types of features are different. That's a whole new challenge just to adapt stuff that you already know how to do in your home trails to a different environment. So right there, that's one thing that keeps me really sharp and keeps me really engaged and keeps me really excited about mountain biking, is going to different spots and trying different things. I really like, one of the things that's driven me throughout my entire, personal trajectory in sport. I started out as a skateboarder. I love the idea of figuring stuff out, figuring out how to do things. And so that, to me, it's not necessarily the size or the gap or the speed you need to take into a feature. It's figuring it out. So the more complex the problem, the more it takes me to kind of break it down and figure out how to do it. And whatever the 1 or 2 or 3 keys that are going to lock it, that's what gives me personal satisfaction. So it isn't necessarily about going bigger or going faster or getting gnarlier. It's more about like, it could be a small feature, or figure it out how to do it differently, or figure out what is the key to unlock it. That, to me, is what gives me great personal satisfaction. So I think that can carry me much further as my risk threshold keeps declining as I get older. Getting that satisfaction of being able to still do some shit, pardon my expression, and figure it out, is so gratifying. And I apply that in snowboarding, and I apply that in skateboarding. I apply that on my phone. I love puzzle games. You know what I mean? Like, I love figuring things out in my work. Like, so that for me is what gives me a lot of satisfaction.
I love that, man. Our sport is just one big puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
And you kind of touching on there a little bit, like the embodiment of the learning on that, the feeling you get when you take, say, a new skill that you've understood, someone's explained how to do it to you, maybe they've shown it to you, get to a demo, that eventually that feeling we get where we're like, that really clicked, I can feel it now.
Yeah.
That's really what I look for, in the sense of like, am I ready to do this, say, new trail or new feature, when I can not only visualize it and see it in my head, but I can feel like what that's going to feel like in my body to do that bike, what that compression is going to feel like at the bottom, where I'm going to push through, where I'm going to be looking. That's what I really look for. And I think there's almost no shortcut to that. It is like, it comes from mileage, and it comes from spending the time out on the trails, practicing those skill sets, getting the reps in. But also, I think it can come from spending time with other riders who are perhaps just a step or two ahead of us as well. So it could be a coach or a buddy that's already proficient in this particular skill set, and just spending time with them, because I think their sense of calmness and ease and almost conviction can rub off on us as well. And then we can take that same sense of conviction in it when we've built the underlying skill set. Does that relate to your process?
Oh, 100%. And then what comes to mind is a couple of things. One is, I get, for me personally, I get that jolt of adrenaline and dopamine from figuring stuff out. And it could be something as simple as figuring out a formula on a spreadsheet. When I hit enter and the formula works, I'm like, yes, and you get that little jolt. But what really comes to mind is when I retired from snowboard coaching, one of the things with all the travel that I had, I wasn't able to have a hobby, because I would disappear in October and come back in April. And so I promised myself I was going to put myself back in learner mode. And so I bought an electric guitar. and I've been learning how to play guitar over the past year. And I found this awesome friend of mine who's a really well accomplished local guitar player, and I've been taking lessons from him. And just today, right before I came and sat down for this interview, he helped me break through something. And as soon as those notes, like, I've been trying to struggle with, it wasn't quite sounding right. I was figuring out on my own. But as soon as he was able to come in and give me just a couple little pointers on what I was doing and how to actually play it, and I played those couple of notes, those 3 or 4 chords, and it sounded like what I wanted it to sound like, then I was like, again, that same jolt of adrenaline and dopamine, that same sense of satisfaction, that same like, yes, I got this. So you can get that feeling from so many different things in your life. As long as you're open to learning and receptive to new challenges, man, that's what makes life fun, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. I can hear it in your voice too, even just the excitement referring back to that light bulb moment.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. And I love, the guitar reference there, like rather than kind of trying it out, figuring it out by trial and error, which perhaps you could have got to the same outcome. I guarantee it would have taken so much longer, and there probably would have been a lot more frustration and kind of like uncomfortable moments along the way. And then if we kind of put that analogy into mountain biking, all of a sudden there's the risk element of it. Like messing up on the guitar is one thing, or messing up an Excel spreadsheet is one thing, but messing up on a mountain can be a lot more painful. So it's like, I think it's really key. You can shorten that whole process, make it a whole lot more fun and a whole lot less frustrating by just following the path that someone else has already blazed for you.
And I think like the physical stuff, whether it's skateboarding or snowboarding or mountain biking, gives you a little bit extra jolt because it's such a feeling of accomplishment when you get something, when you figure it out. Because there's higher consequence of not figuring it out and having an unsuccessful outcome. So yeah, I think there's definitely a bigger hit of that dopamine when you figure something out. That's something physical like that. At least for those of us who live that kind of active lifestyle and participate in sports that have that element of risk. I think there's a huge, brain chemical thing that happens when we overcome those challenges and face those fears and face that risk and still are able to accomplish something. So
people kind of reference kids and say, "Oh, I wish I was still a kid." They can just break themselves and they don't have to go to work or school, or they recover so much quicker. But I think that risk is actually the thing that keeps it being so fun, or quote unquote addictive. Because if we could just get to pro level in mountain biking tomorrow, like, it wouldn't be fun anymore. There wouldn't be that challenge. It is really the process is the fun part, not necessarily the end goal of the outcome.
Yeah, I know, totally. And like, it goes back to what I was saying about being an instructor too, is like the day I think I know everything is the day I should quit. I mean, if you know everything and you're not challenging yourself anymore, progressing, whether that's physically or as a coach or instructor, like, what's kind of the point? Like, if you've reached that pinnacle and aren't getting any better or aren't trying to get any better, like, that just seems to be kind of pointless for me personally, at least.
Yeah, that is a big thing. And I've had this conversation with others on the podcast before. There is such a thing as a mountain bike instructor that is just doing it for a job. Maybe their thing's actually skiing or snowboarding, and they're like, I just need to do something in summer. I just want to get my pass, so I'm going to be a bike coach.
Yeah.
But we are really limiting like the opportunities and the outcomes for our students if we are lit up and engaged in the learning process ourselves, if we're not practicing what we're preaching, so to speak.
I completely agree. And you can see that, in professional athletes too. Like there's ones that are really, really driven to be the best in the world, like the LeBron Jameses, the Wayne Gretzky's, the Michael Jordans. They are driven. They cannot stop. Michaela Schifrin. They cannot stop trying to be the best they can possibly be, and therefore the best in the world. Not every athlete or coach has to be like quite that driven, but there is a drive to improve that needs to be there. And that there's professional athletes out there that just collect a paycheck and then don't really care about maybe getting that much better. They're I don't know, middle of the road journeyman basketball player, but they're making millions of dollars a year. And like, okay, cool, I'm happy with this. That doesn't fly for me personally. That's not how I'm wired. But there's people out there that approach things that way.
Yeah, I feel like there's more happiness to be found in following wherever that spark is.
Yeah.
Like you say, the day that mountain bike coaching for us dries up and we feel like there's nowhere else to go, it's probably the time for us to do something else.
Yeah, to hang it up.
Yeah, exactly. Just, what is lighting me up at the moment? Man, this has been a great conversation. I want to respect your time, but there is one last thing I wanted to touch on because I feel like it will be useful for our listeners.
Okay.
what are the different learning styles? We've talked a lot about human-centric approaches and meeting the students where they're at. What are some of the different learning styles you see as a mountain bike instructor and as a coach trainer?
Well, I mean, you have the classic like visual, auditory, kinesthetic, yada yada yada. But the science shows that nobody's a visual learner, nobody's a kinesthetic learner, nobody's an auditory learner. Everybody takes in information through those three different channels, and yeah, one might resonate and impact somebody more than another. Like I mentioned before, that I'm kind of visual. Like I need to look at something, and once I look at it, I kind of apply my knowledge of those skills and break it down and then give it a try. So it might be a little bit more towards the visual side of things, but I think we get caught in a trap of I'm a visual learner, or I'm an auditory learner. That's just not how the brain operates. The brain operates by taking in information from as many sources as possible, and being able to filter that information into stuff that's really going to have an impact. So I think our job as instructors is to make sure that we kind of hit all those different things, that we show people a good example. We explain what it's about in a nice, simple, concise way. We have them do it and offer some feedback. So I think those principles I talked about before, I didn't touch on all of them, that Anders Ericsson coined of deliberate practice. Those are the things more than learning styles that are going to have an impact on progression. And those things include having a clear mental model of what you're trying to accomplish. So having set established goals, being able to push your comfort zones a little bit, like we talked about earlier, finding that challenge zone where you're not bored and disengaged, but you're not so scared that you disengage also, but finding those pushing your comfort zones, having an expert give you feedback, having structured practice time. Those are all those elements of Anders Ericsson's deliberate practice, and I think are more impactful than necessarily focusing on learning styles. Because I think all those things that are talked about in that deliberate practice hit all those learning styles, right? So that to me is more important than necessarily the quote unquote learning styles that are out there.
I love that. And that really speaks to bringing down some perhaps abstract concepts that we talk about and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm a thinker, or I'm a doer, or I'm a watcher. But actually, like as coaches, how do we actually deliver this and get someone doing deliberate practice in a way that's going to land?
Well, and you know, not to plug PMBA, but that's another thing that kind of like attracted me to the PMBA system, is that we provide that structure. It's very similar to, again, the principles of deliberate practice through some of our concepts, the lesson format, the training wheel, the idea progression, along with the 6 skills model, that those are the tools and how you build an effective lesson, session, season, month-long training program, whatever you want to do with your students, with your athletes, that hit all those different quote unquote learning styles. So we have that format that makes sure that we have the biggest impact on learning.
Interesting, man. I just can't stop asking questions as we talk. Thinking about that training wheel. So we've got the introduction phase where we introduce a new skill. We've got the development phase where we develop that. Then we go into experimenting with that skill. So different timings, different amounts. And then we've got the application. So really getting mileage, applying that new skill set to a broad variety of terrain. Which one of those do you think is the one kind of area that coaches or instructors spend the least amount of time on that they could spend more time on?
That is a good question. I think probably that explore phase, because that's where you really consolidate learning, by exploring that concept in a whole bunch of different environments, different types of terrain, different speeds, different shapes, applying that skill to different types of features or different types of trails. I think oftentimes as instructors, we jump ahead to the next thing far too quickly without letting what the thing we're working on consolidate more. I think it's really easy to make those big leaps and be like, okay, cool. Like, let's put it in snowboard terms. I'll circle back. You just landed your first 360. Let's work on 540s. You know what I mean? Like, let's give some time. Let's do 360s on bigger jumps. Let's do them on smaller jumps. Let's do them going faster. Let's do them going slower. Let's do some drops. Like before we get to cathedral, let's do some other drops that are maybe about the same size, but maybe have a little bit more of a mellower approach. Like all letting that information consolidate before we jump right to that outcome. And that's okay. I think we get stuck in this trap oftentimes as instructors, because we get paid for what we do, of making sure that the student goals are like met as quickly as possible. And I don't think that's necessarily the right approach. I think we need to engage with our students to the point that they understand that it's a process, and that the end goal may not be this immediate gratification, and it might take some time to get there. We're going to spend some time exploring it. And to your point earlier, you're going to have much more success in the end. You're going to feel much better about that success, and it's going to lay that foundation for moving on to the next step. So
Definitely. That really mirrors one of my favorite sayings, which is do less well.
yeah,
And that's
I totally
so
agree.
important to remember, both as a writer and as a coach, is like one thing at a time. And there's no need to layer on more and more information or cover more and more skill sets in one session or other. Like we can spend, multiple sessions, even multiple months working on one really specific skill set and really dive in deep into that explore phase, as you said. That's something I've found, like the writers I work with that experience the best results longer term are the ones that are doing a longer term coaching package, because that gives us the time and the freedom to really kind of practice things, go home, rest, let those neural pathways really solidify, and then continue to practice in a variety of different environments and terrain, rather than just learn something new and call it quits there and kind of leave them in that development stage where they're like, oh, I can do this in a skills area, but it's not quite making sense on this trail or that trail or anything else that I'm actually writing.
Yeah, totally. And I think again, as instructors, we get caught in that trap of wanting to deliver the final outcome far too quickly, and then also like adding more information. Like to your point, one of my friends told me years ago, like sometimes the best coaching is not coaching. It's just don't say a word, just go out and ride, let the terrain do the work, lay the foundation, go out and ride a bunch of different features, and maybe you like have a little bit of guidance in here. It's like, okay, just remember X, Y, and Z, we're going to go tackle this trail, but not make it overly coaching. And I think we get caught in that trap a lot of wanting to like, although I'm not really setting a very good example in this particular podcast interview of talking less.
No, but it is a thing, right? And this is the time to talk more, especially in a podcast. That's not about our intention, right? But I find it funny. A lot of my job these days, as we live in this information age, which is growing exponentially, like the amount of information that people are consuming is growing exponentially. Like I spend a lot of time actually getting them to think about less while they're writing.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing to do as a coach, because often we show up and we think we're getting paid to give writers something, a new technique, a new tactic. But oftentimes in doing that analysis and actually spending some time in person with them, I realize what they actually need is to be thinking about less while they're cornering, because they know how to corner, but it's this information and trying to think about too many things all at once that's holding them back from actually doing what they know.
Yeah, 100%. Like when you talk about like the science of skill acquisition and motor learning, the top level is autonomy, depending on whatever model you look at. But basically, like if you look at the conscious competence model, it's unconscious competence. If you look at the Fitz and Posner skill development model, it's autonomy. Basically, what you're trying to do is get people to a point that they can adapt and make those decisions automatically and subconsciously. It's what separates the pro riders from like a pro downloader. It's what separates Jackson Goldstone from me. Is the ability to process that information and make those decisions and adapt the skills with a high level of precision and coordination and timing in an instant, way quicker than anybody else can. So yeah, I think that's huge. Think less.
Well, blessed. That's a good little takeout for our listeners. Wrapping things up here, one last thing I'm excited to ask you is, looking ahead, what's one thing the PMBIA is up to this year that you're excited about? And what's another thing you're excited about the direction the organization is heading in the longer term?
Well, that's a really good question, because there's so much stuff that we've got going on, but a lot of it is, let's call it kind of under the hood, that are not really readily apparent to the naked eye, so to speak. What I'm trying to do is, as I alluded to earlier, is one of the things that really attracts me to PMBA is that whole idea of giving people the structure and the framework. What we're doing is teaching people what are the physical properties of baking that chocolate chip cookie, what are the different ingredients that go into it, and then letting people either make that chocolate chip cookie from that recipe or expand their learning to figure out how to make it differently. So what I want to do is make sure that we're doing that, is that all of our learning objectives in our courses are designed to maximize the impact of that learning and maximize a deep understanding of what we're trying to do. And so, for example, the level 1 course is such a fantastic foundation. What I'm trying to do is take that level 1 course and boil it down into a accessible and objective set of competencies and learning objectives for the instructor trainer to lead that course in. What that does is it gives them the flexibility to adapt the course to the needs of the people that are in that course, into the terrain, into the venue. So instead of being a scripted level 1 course, we're teaching the learning objectives, not to the objective skills that you're going to see. We want to make sure that we can assess that people actually learned the concepts that we want to impart. So it's a subtle difference, but it gives our instructor trainers much more leeway in leading a level 1 course to maximize learning. And the effect on our instructors is it's going to make sure the people taking our courses, it's going to make sure that they're going to leave with the tools to be as an effective instructor as possible, ultimately at the end of the day, to help their students progress, give them a really positive experience, and stay with the sport that we all love. Because at the end of the day, that's really what this is about, right? Is making sure that the people who are taking a lesson from a qualified instructor are going to have a great experience, continue in the sport. So by taking that approach, that learning objectives and competency approach, hopefully that trickles down to giving our students, the ones that are taking lessons and driving the mountain bike industry and allowing us to have jobs, but also, enjoy the sport that is so amazing, and giving them a better experience. So again, kind of a little bit of a long-winded rambling answer, but I think that is what I'm most excited about, is making sure that the product we put out there for our members is going to help them teach better lessons.
I love that, man. What better outcome could we hope for as instructors and guides?
Yeah, exactly. We want people to be stoked, right? Because we want people to have fun, because it's fun to have fun.
Fantastic, John. It's fun to have fun. That's what it's all about. I think that's a great place to end this conversation today. Thank you so much for your time. And excited to see you run on the trails this year.
Oh, thank you, Jake. I really appreciate it. We'll be up your way later this summer, and looking forward to taking some laps again.
Fantastic. Cheers, John.